Hey everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here, aka the Comic Concierge. Today I'm going to do a little bit of different video where I'm going to talk about some books that I picked up from the dollar bin, because who doesn't look like a good dive into the dollar bin? And the terminology key issue, I feel like it's thrown around so much to the point of ad nauseum right now, where everything is a key issue. And I wanted to talk about kind of my mindset when it comes to comic book collecting, because I think I'm a comic book reader first. That's what I really appreciate most. But I do collect, but in a different way, I think, compared to most people, where I don't really concern myself really what people think outside of the world of when it comes to what a key issue is. To me, a key issue is something you enjoy reading, and everything else is just a bonus. But there are some issues that I am specifically trying to collect, but not because they really have any value. That's something I really don't consider when I collect the books I do. Usually there's because of A, I want to read them, or B, I have some sort of sentimental value to it, or just trying to collect a certain run. And one of those runs, I was able to pick a number of books up and from the dollar bin. And the two issue series right now that I'm really focusing the most on are Ed Brubaker's run on Captain America and Exiles, which is this series right here. So both, the reason being, because these are two series that help me kind of get back into the world of comics, but in different ways. I actually started reading this book before I was even really collecting comics. I worked at Macy's for a while, and during my lunch break, we had Borders across the parking lot. So I'd go to that Borders, sit in this nice little comfy chair, and they had a rack of comic books, so I would pick up some of those comic books and start reading them. And one of the ones that caught my eye immediately was Exiles, because I was kind of an X-Men fan, but there's something about the concept really spoke to me, and a big part was I noticed there were some characters from the Age of Apocalypse who I remembered because I was a big fan of that run. I really liked the toys, so I'm like, oh, are they back? And then when I started reading it, I saw, well, kind of, but not really. So Exiles is kind of it's a adjacent X-Men title. By that, these are X-Men characters, but sometimes they are also Avengers characters, but they're all from different dimensions. It's like taking that show from the 90s, Sliders, where you have this group of people that would go from dimension to dimension to dimension and combining it with the world of X-Men. But this team was put together by reasons unknown for the majority of the run. You don't really find out why this was all happening till near the end of this run, which went 100 issues before it was taken over and became a new Exiles, and Chris Claremont kind of ruined it. But during that time, you got all these random characters, different takes on characters that would take, Cannonball and make it a different version of it. The one key character that I really liked, though, was Blink, who I'm one of my favorite characters. She kind of blew out when it came to the Age of Apocalypse, and she went away, but came back into this book. And also Morph is in this. Morph is one of my favorite parts of the series. He's the comic relief, and there's some great moments, some really breaking the third wall. In a way, I felt Morph was more Deadpool before Deadpool became Deadpool, or at least has a similar personality, at least, because he makes references to things like The Simpsons. He doesn't speak to you directly, but he comes very close. And what they have to do is go to this group of different individuals from different dimensions. It's forced together as a team, and they have to work together to solve some sort of problem that's happening in this one dimension. They find out they have this talisman on their arm. It tells them what's wrong, and they have to go and try to solve it. So it was an ever-changing book. It was an easy book to get on as a new reader, because each new storyline was mostly a lot of new characters. It was really welcoming for new readers, and it wasn't really tied to a lot of continuity, because a lot of these characters never were seen before. These were brand new worlds, so you didn't really have to worry about. Even I think I started with one of the issues that I'll get to. I really love this cover, to be adjacent, but combining the world of Doctor Doom and Iron Man. But this was one of the first ones I read, and I was happy to really pick this up from the dollar bin, because there's also another team throughout this, the Weapon X team, which were more of the they did some of the more horrible stuff. They were kind of reserved, they were almost villains in a way, and eventually the Exiles team and the Weapon X team kind of have a conflict and end up fighting with each other and against each other, and then that goes away but comes back with Hyperion near the end of the 100 issues. But it was just really fun to pick up these issues. So I've been trying to piece this together. I didn't start collecting it to about issue 60 or so, I think. So and this is a book I often find a lot in the dollar bin because no one really seems to care that much. The only issue like I really want that I don't have is issue number 1, which is I think only like a $5 book. But I've been cheap. I've just been hoping to find it in the dollar bin, but I haven't been able to. And I don't want to like order it because it's more fun just to try to discover it randomly at a con. And of course, we have not had any cons or at my local comic book store. So this week I was able to pick up just a bunch of these issues. I think I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 8 or so of the run and just random issues. It was written by different writers. It was a changing team. But this was when I was reading this, I never really paid attention to who was writing the book. Like I didn't even know until I was looking at this now that Judd Winnick wrote some of these issues to start with, and then like I mentioned, eventually Claremont takes it over near the end, and he kind of completely changes it, makes it basically a generic X-Men title. So if you're looking for an X-Men book, I think this is all available on Comixology Unlimited. This is like I think a good entry point for the world of the X-Men because you see a lot of the characters, and it doesn't require you to like know all the history of the X-Men, and it's just fun seeing all these different interpretations of these characters, and there's always something new. It's always moving, and it ties into some of the classic X-Men runs, some of the classic Marvel runs. One of the storylines that this is about, this World Tour storyline, they went to different universes that were all different parts, major stories within Marvel, from the House of M to Civil War, I believe. This was a Mojoverse, so it was kind of taking that idea and expanding it throughout. And I know, with things like the multiverse coming up with Doctor Strange, that was talked about a lot with WandaVision, and obviously with like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, this has a lot of that type of storytelling. So if you enjoyed that idea, seeing these different takes on these characters, this is a good book to read. And like I said, it's often very cheap. You can pick up pretty much any issue in the dollar bins, and I think even if you haven't read previous issues, find it. And there's more. Like I said, he's kind of this like amorphic blob. There's no like facial features, but has a lot of personality, and is a fan of the X-Men cartoon back in the day, where he was really only in one issue. I was happy to see him. So I was really excited to pick up those issues, add them to my bin, and getting closer and closer to finishing up and getting all 100 issues. At times, too, there are moments where I'm just focusing on maybe getting a certain creator or artist work when I can find them in the dollar bin. And recently, it's been Chris Samney. I've been reading a lot of his books lately. I'm loving Firepower, Jonah, his new children's age book, and then I've read a lot of his Daredevil run, but I never collected it because it was at a time when I really wasn't getting books. So when I can find any of his run with Mark Waid, which is a fantastic Daredevil run, it's totally a little bit different than something like Born Again. Is more akin to like when Daredevil first started. It's not as dark and dreary. It's much more fun and adventurous, and it goes on for maybe a little bit too long. But it's also Chris Samney art and Mark Waid. They have a chemistry together as creators. They did this. They had a really great run on Captain America as well. The Black Widow run, a series, one of the best Black Widow comics ever. So anytime I find one of his Daredevil runs or Daredevil comics, I pick it up. If depending on the cover, I don't think I'll ever finish this complete run. It's also really hard to kind of know where these all fit, because this was a run that was during the time when Marvel renumbers all the time. So this is like issue 14, but this was probably their 30th or 40th issue, but they just kept renumbering things. So it's just I would this is a good run to get into if you want to read Daredevil. I love the current Daredevil run; it's really good. But I feel like with Daredevil, often like the runs tend to ape back to Frank Miller a lot. Even great runs like Ed Brubaker's run and Michael Bendis' run. This was something very different. It was a nice palate cleanser to those, not trying to kind of ape what happened. And maybe people who don't typically like Daredevil may actually enjoy this. Maybe hardcore Daredevil fans might not, because of the change in tone. Eventually, too, he loses a secret identity and stuff like that. So, but yeah, one of the best Marvel runs I think of in last decade or so. So, and it's another issue. So I picked up 3 or 4 issues of that. Just happy to get Chris Samney art. And this is where I'm not necessarily going to be reading the issues, more so just kind of looking through the art, seeing how he's evolved. Always chooses really great colors as well. But I've only read this in trade, so getting the issues themselves has been enjoyable. The other thing I'd look at too when I go to dollar bins is if like I can find an entire series all for $1, which doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes does. And I came very close, but not completely. One of my favorite books from last year, at least one that was up there pretty high, was Olympia, and this was a huge love letter to comics, really to Jack Kirby, and it's a story of involving where a comic book character kind of comes to life and this kid who's a huge fan of this character, he comes into his world and then things happen. So if you've been enjoying crossover with Donny Cates, where crossover is this love letter to comics in general, this is more so a love letter to the creators in a way where it's clearly like openly aping Jack Kirby. And it's just been a really fun story. It was a really fun story from beginning to end. It kind of got messed up because of COVID, like most books, but I thought I got every issue, but then I realized I got 2 of issue number 1, so this is one of the first covers, but this is another cover for issue number 1, and I really buy multiple copies of the same book, but for $1, I didn't mind. Plus, a Christian War cover is never a bad thing. So, I was able to pick up pretty much every issue except for issue 4, and this is issue number 2. And I know the art can maybe be a little bit simple for some people. There's not a lot of lines here. It's not, but when it comes to just storytelling and the dynamic of it, I enjoyed it. And I thought the way it incorporated comic book techniques and kind of the idea of a creator and his impact on a character, I thought that was a fun approach to it. So if you haven't read it, I would highly, and then you see right here, obviously, where you see Jack Kirby literally in the book itself. So, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of dedication, a lot of creators go out of their way to comment on Jack Kirby a lot in their books recently. Obviously, for example, last year we also had this from Tom Sicoli, which is also great. Obviously, not something you can get in the dollar bin, but it just seems like, I don't know if it's because Stan Lee has been getting so much credit as of late because of the films, where comic book creators are like, you know what, we need to make sure we give Kirby his due as well, but deservingly so. And then the last issue of Olympia. So the only issue I didn't get was issue number 4, but it'll just be on my list of books to pick up if I find it in a dollar bin moving forward. Most likely at a different shop or a different Comic-Con if it's there. So that's kind of my approach. Like, I don't see the purpose of buying books because other people tell you that they're important, or this idea that comics are going to be an investment. I think that's a very dangerous precedent to think of, because more often than not, how much you spend on a comic is the most you will ever sell it for, if not less. Of course, there's some changes to that, and you'll have a book that'll blow up here and there, but I don't really care about that. I read books because I want to read. I buy books because I want to read them, or like I said, they have certain value to me, and it really, I think, makes comics feel like this infomercial rather than an art form, and that's what I kind of have a problem with it. And I feel like there is some, I don't want to say dishonesty, but I question anyone who's telling me that they're going to try to make me rich, whether it's through comics or some random program they have, because there's often something else behind it. And maybe that's being cynical, but I think some people are getting caught up with things, especially right now because of COVID. And I worry that this new speculation bubble will burst again. Hopefully comic book stores won't be impacted as much as last time. But some individuals might, because if you're thinking you're going to get this book and it's going to, be a college investment from 10 years from now, I don't know about that. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope all these people make their money back and it gains in value. That'd be fantastic. I'm just, I guess, mostly a cautious person when it comes to that. And I just really wanted to talk about some great comics that you can get for $1, because I think a lot of the dollar bin to me is just a treasure trove of adventure, and just seeing what you can find out of there. Sometimes you find some things that ends up becoming something valuable moving forward, but mostly it's just being able to go back and maybe get a book that I missed and didn't collect, or seek out some great art. And then if that person were ever to come to a con, I have a book I can get signed and talk to the creator about. So anyways, that's it for me for this week. I hope to do some more dollar bin dive books videos in the future, maybe when I get another big collection out. So I'll talk to you then.